It is really an honor to be here today. As Chris was saying, I am a writer, I'm an illustrator, and I'm an entrepreneur. I'm the CEO of the creatively named Emily McDowell Studio. Where is it? There it is. The creatively named Emily McDowell Studio. And we are in about 1,800 stores around the world. We're in Urban Outfitters. We're in Whole Foods. I'm saying all this not to be like, I'm so awesome, but to say that I have zero qualifications to run a company. I do not have an MBA. I have a bachelor's degree in creative writing. And the last time I took math was the 10th grade, and I got a C-. So, this is our company manifesto that I can open with here. Let's get real. Let's make friends with our imperfections, because they're the side effects of being human, and there's medicine in me too. Let's laugh at ourselves. It sure beats the hell out of the alternative. Let's agree that normal isn't a thing, and unlovable isn't either. Let's not be dicks. There are already enough dicks. Let's reframe our mistakes as lessons and start kicking ass at learning. And let's use honesty and humor and heart to leave this place a little better than we found it. Thank you. And as Chris was saying, we make greeting cards for the relationships we really have and products that speak to who we really are, and I will get to what that's about. The process that I lived my life up until this point, the trajectory of success, one might say, looked something like this. It was not a linear path, my friends. Note, fear, confusion, a lot of questionable life choices, a learning curve that was more like a cliff. And the story of how I got here starts actually 16 years ago today when I was diagnosed with cancer. Stage 3 Hodgkin's lymphoma, and my treatment was 8 months of chemo and radiation. I had just turned 24 years old. If you have ever known anyone in their early 20s, or if you've ever been in your early 20s, you know that is a strange age. You are technically an adult, and yet, at the same time, your entire diet is things like instant ramen and Twizzlers, and if it was the 90s, probably cigarettes. And I know, like, for sure that if texting had been around in the late 90s, I would have definitely used it to break up with people inappropriately. What I'm saying is that when you're in your early 20s, you don't necessarily have the most adult judgment or grasp on the world. At least I didn't. And another thing that's very true about people in their early 20s is that most of us have not known anyone with a real major illness, other than maybe a grandparent, sometimes a parent, but really very rarely a friend. I definitely hadn't. And so I was very surprised to find that the hardest thing for me about having cancer wasn't any of the things that you hear about. It wasn't throwing up from chemo, it wasn't losing my hair, it wasn't being called sir at Starbucks by baristas because I had no hair. It was the loneliness that I felt when friends and even family disappeared from my life because they didn't know what to say or do or how to even be around me as a sick person. Being sick is really alienating because you're the same person that you were the day before your diagnosis, and at the same time, no one you know can relate to you anymore. And in our culture, we don't talk about illness and death and loss at all, especially when you're that young, and so when it happens, people get scared. I didn't really realize this, because I had very little life experience being so young. The other thing that happens is that people who do stick around, not knowing what to say, are very, very well-intentioned, and they you end up hearing a lot of platitudes, like, everything happens for a reason, or a lot of different conflicting advice by well-meaning people who are trying to help, like, be vegan, be paleo, eat only fish. And those things get really confusing to hear. And then you start to feel very weird because on one hand, you're sort of resenting all of this advice and stuff that's coming at you. And on the other hand, you know people are just trying to help and you're so grateful that they stuck around and they're there. And so you end up feeling like kind of an awful person and the whole thing is just very confusing. So not having much perspective and life experience meant that I came to a very painful conclusion about why people had disappeared from my life when I was sick. And that was, it was because I wasn't lovable enough. That if only I had been a better friend or cooler or better at having cancer, that people would be lined up down the block to bring me a casserole. And that just wasn't happening. And so it was very painful. And so, like with a lot of painful things, I ended up putting it away in a box in my brain, along with some things like puberty and that time in second grade that I pooped my pants in school and in a quick thinking moment told everyone I sat on a cupcake, but it was no one's birthday. So, I'll leave you with that. So after surviving my brush with death at age 25, I decided that what I really wanted to do with my life was make commercials. I am probably the only person in history who went into advertising after surviving cancer. But it was a way for me to be creative and get health insurance at the same time. And so I decided that it made sense, which it did. I worked in advertising for 9 years. And I started off as a writer or an art director, then I became a writer, and then I became a creative director. If you've seen Mad Men, it's not inaccurate. My job was to come up with the ideas for the campaigns and then also come up with writing the commercials, basically. But the thing that was the most interesting to me was actually always the psychological strategy behind why we do what we do and why we buy things. I learned a lot in my career in advertising. I learned how to work super, super hard. I learned how to have a million ideas in a very short period of time and how to decide which of those ideas were not utterly terrible. I learned how to be a good boss, and I learned how to be a really bad boss. And the most important thing that I learned, however, in terms of my own future and in terms of the thing that drives the behavior of every one of us in this room, is that we are all constantly seeking solutions to our problems. A successful ad campaign convinces people that the product you are selling solves their problem. Usually, the way that it has to go down is advertisers will invent a problem, convince people that they have it, and then convince people that what they're selling is the solution. For example, the kind of pants that have padding in the butt to make your butt look bigger. Having too small of a butt is a new fake problem. Another example is the entire beauty industry. So, here's a shortcut, I will tell you. If you solve an actual problem with your product, it will sell itself, especially a problem that no one else is solving. You don't need a whole fancy big ad campaign. You don't need, all of this money. You just need to solve a real problem. And that is a really good news for people who are entrepreneurs, people who are small business people, because if you actually solve a problem with your product, social media and technology has made it so that it's very easy to get your product in front of a lot of people because people share it without you having to spend a lot of money. You just have to have a product that actually solves a problem. So, back to my career. I've been working maybe 3 years, and I'm realizing I am not in the right place. It was not a good fit for me, and yet I wasn't bad at it. And so I really didn't want to look at the fact that it wasn't the best place for me. And I kept working. I was working really hard, and I kept climbing that ladder, and I was doing just well enough to keep getting promoted. And I kept doing that thing where I was telling myself, like, I've put so much work into this so far that it's going to get better. Like, it has to get better. When I have a different boss, or when I'm on a different client, or when I'm working in a different place, like, then it will all be worth it. All of this effort is going to eventually be worth it. Well, I got to a point in about 2011. I finally got a promotion I'd been working towards for a very long time. And I realized that the ladder I'd been climbing had been leaning against the wrong wall the entire time. And I really had to take a look at that and realize that I needed to get out. And I felt like, what am I going to do? I am 35. I feel like I'm too old to start at the bottom of another industry. I wasn't even thinking about starting my own company because I was really believed that that required skills that I didn't have, like definitely 11th grade math. And so that wasn't even on my radar. And yet, at the same time, I knew that I needed to be doing something else. And I was fortunate in that I could freelance for at least a couple of years, and I knew I'd be okay financially if I quit. So, in 2011, I quit my job without a plan other than freelance. And then, right around that same time, I had the opportunity to experience cancer again. This time, I wasn't the patient. This time, I was the friend. My former college roommate and one of my best friends, Amy, was diagnosed with cancer and died 3 months later. And my friends and I were all in our mid-30s at this point, and so we were a little bit more equipped to handle adult problems than we'd been 10 years plus earlier. But I noticed the same thing. Nobody knew what to do or what to say or how to be with her. And people started coming to me and saying, help. You had cancer, it was very different, but what do I do? And I realized for the first time, wait a minute, there is something valuable that came out of this experience that I worked so hard to leave behind and never think about again. And that was, because of my experience, I have the ability here to be kind of a cancer translator, and I have the opportunity to make things a little bit better and maybe a little less lonely for Amy. And I also realized something very important, and that was, when a terrible thing happens to you, like loss or death or illness, some people get scared and disappear because they don't know how to deal. This has nothing to do with how lovable you are. And it has everything to do with fear. We don't talk about this stuff. And so when it happens, most of us don't have the language and aren't equipped to know how to handle it and know what to do. And so we get terrified And that fear is so powerful that it prevents us not only from doing what we know is right, which is reaching out, it prevents us from doing what we actually want to do. I mean, when your friend gets sick, no one sits there and thinks, I really want to help her, but I think what the best thing to do is to just pretend this isn't happening and never call her, and then I'm going to feel super guilty about it every day, and then we'll see each other in like a year at the grocery store, and it'll be awful. Like, no one wants that. People really want to help, and when Amy got sick, I wasn't any kind of wise sage with any answers. All that I had was, because of my experience, the ability to drop the fear and just be with her, which, by the way, is way easier than it sounds because 99% of it is about listening and not being afraid of awkward silence. So here is a shitty irony. The times we're at our lowest and loneliest, when we most are in need of human connection, are also the times when people don't know what to say. And I was really, really struck by that during her illness. And having pulled out that box from my brain and looked inside, there were some other things in there that I was remembering from when I was sick. And one of them is the questionable nature of many sympathy cards. So, you have get well soon, which is weird if you might not. Like, cool, I'll try. And then you have with sympathy, which is like a picture of a sunset or a flower, and maybe makes you feel like you're already dead. And then, if you are lucky enough to have cancer, there are strange jokes about things like free boob jobs that you will find in the store that always felt to me like they were written by someone at a card company who got an assignment to write a card about cancer, and never felt like they resonated with me. So I'm thinking about all of this, and I'm freelancing, and I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do. And I have an Etsy shop that I've recently opened because I started reading an article about what to do when you don't know what to do with your life, and it advised me to start doing what I did as a kid, which was drawing pictures and writing stories. So I started doing that and opened this Etsy shop, and I started selling illustrated prints that I could print myself on my printer, and that was going well. But I got a little bored, and I started feeling like I really want to solve a problem. What problem can I solve, and how do I write more because I missed writing? And I started thinking about greeting cards in general. And now the greeting card industry is very different now, but this was 2011. And at the time, the Hallmark ethos was still very much in play. They were really defining the card industry. And the card industry was akin to if television had stayed in the 1960s and never moved forward. So it was all about aspirational relationships. It was all about these saccharine versions of relationships that felt very fake to me. And it was gushy Mother's Day cards that were poems about your mom, or these soulmate Valentine's Day cards. And I would end up making my own cards because I felt like nothing really resonated with me in the stores, and I would have a really hard time. And sort of a bigger, wider point I started thinking about was, with all of this aspirational stuff, was that the downside of an aspirational is that if you are a person who has these normal, messy relationships, which is basically everyone, you end up seeing these cards and think, ugh, what is wrong with me? Like, I must be kind of a freak because this is not me. Like, I can't say that to my mom, or I don't even know if my boyfriend is even into me. So, it was very exclusionary, and it felt like there was a real opportunity to solve a problem there, which was speaking truthfully to people about the kinds of relationships that we really have. So I started thinking about relationships that are common, that were not really represented in greeting card world. And Valentine's Day was coming up. So I was thinking about basically half of the relationships on any given Valentine's Day are people who are kind of dating, but like not really. And how that is so awful on Valentine's Day, because you have a big problem. You can either give them nothing, which feels super weird, or you can give them a normal card and then give them a speech about how, like, it doesn't really mean anything, like, forget it. So I decided, what if I tried to solve that problem? And what if I made a card that was basically that speech? And so I did. I made this card. It says, I know we're not like together or anything, but it felt weird to just not say anything, so I got you this card. It's not a big deal. It doesn't really mean anything. There isn't even a heart on it. So basically, it's a card saying hi. Forget it. I put this card in my Etsy shop, and I was very lucky in that Etsy put it on their Facebook page. But then what happened was it became Etsy's most liked and most shared post of that entire year. And it went crazy viral. And I sold 1,700 of that card one by one in a week from my site, except for like some dudes in San Francisco that were buying like 10 at a time. And then I had to cut off the shipping, because here is a lesson. If you are going to sell a Valentine card on the internet, you should list it before January 29th. Anyway, so that card was really successful. People really liked it, and I thought, here is a problem that I think that I can help solve. And so that card was actually the birth of my entire company, which is cards for the relationships that we actually have. And here are 3 cards that I think really exemplify my work and what that means. Happy birthday! I got you a stressful conversation about finding your life's true purpose in our limited time on this planet. Just kidding. Let's have brunch. There's nobody else I'd rather lie in bed and look at my phone next to. And a Father's Day card. I love you, Dad, but we don't have to talk about it. So there are 2 really big reasons why the awkward dating card was so successful. And these 2 reasons are things that I try to use in all of my work from now on. Just moving forward, I try to put them in everything. The first thing is that Me Too is empowering. Representation is really important. If you have gone through your whole life being X and everything out there is Y, and you feel like, ooh, I'm X, and then you see something that is also X, you are going to really like that thing. It legitimizes, it makes us feel like we're not alone. It makes us feel like something out there gets us when you feel represented. I mean, I always think about Amy Schumer as a really good example of this. So Amy Schumer's TV show came on when I was 37 years old, and I, up until then, had never seen someone on television who I felt understood what it was like to be me. And I loved her. And I felt like I will buy anything this woman puts out in the world, which is probably why she got a $10 million book deal. And I just think that that concept is very, very important when you're thinking about making something. Anytime that we can expand the definition of what normal is, we're doing humanity a great service. And that's really a tenet of everything that I try to do with my company. And then the second reason that the awkward dating card was so successful is that it solved a problem. The easiest path to a successful product is to solve a freaking problem, like that lesson from advertising. It solved the problem of all of these people being like, oh, what do I do on Valentine's Day for my weird relationship that there are no cards for? And there you go. So, 3 months after the awkward dating card did its thing, I launched my wholesale card collection at the National Stationery Show in New York City, which is like the Fashion Week of stationery. That is a thing. And Urban Outfitters immediately picked it up, and a lot of stores liked it, and by that fall, I had cards and other products. We were doing prints and dish towels in 500 stores, plus Urban Outfitters. I had a studio, I had employees. And as they say, I was learning how to build the plane and fly it at the same time, which is really the story of every entrepreneur. So I really knew from the beginning that I wanted to make sympathy cards that were better, that were different. I knew from my experience as being a sick person and from being a friend to a sick person that there were 2 problems to solve, actually 3. 1, people really want to reach out to someone in grief or illness or any of those situations where they don't know what to say, but they don't have the tools to do it. Number 2, being in those situations is incredibly lonely. Number 3, there weren't really very many cards that solved 1 or 2. So I knew that I wanted to use truth and insight to help people connect around these issues, and which is basically what I do with the rest of my line. The big irony is that we have so many amazing birthday cards and holiday cards and anniversary cards out there and Halloween cards, but no one needs a Halloween card. The times when we really need a card, when we really need someone to reach out and say, yes, I care about you, I connect with you, are the times when there really wasn't much in the way of tools to do that. And cards are a pretty inherently meaningful thing because they're an actual tangible piece of paper, especially right now when all of our communication is digital and goes on a screen and goes away. We keep cards in a special drawer, and some of us keep them for years, even Easter cards. And so I felt like it was really important that I do this and that I do it right. I wanted to wait a little bit before I launched these because I knew that it was a fairly big, interesting idea, and I didn't want to be pigeonholed as Cancer Card Girl. I wanted to have this company that had this broader mission. And so I wanted to make sure that we were known for that before we launched these so that these could fit under that brand umbrella. And I also saw that our audience was growing and growing with time, and I knew that if I waited a bit, there was a better chance of getting them out there in front of a lot of people if we waited. So in May of 2015, we launched our first collection of empathy cards. And this is a bestseller. Please let me be the first to punch the next person who tells you everything happens for a reason. I'm sorry you're going through this. Here's another one. I'm so sorry you're sick. I want you to know that I will never try to sell you on some random treatment I read about on the internet. And here's a couple more. You're not a burden, you're a human. And finally, there is no good card for this. I'm so sorry. We have about 16 of these. These are just examples. So I put these out, and we knew that they would be successful in illness communities. We knew that people would like them. We had absolutely no idea what was about to happen. And that was, they ended up being featured in 300 plus media outlets all over the world. from the New York Times to Al Jazeera to South African Public Radio to whatever that big newspaper is in Australia that I can't remember, to I was on Good Morning America, NBC came to my studio. It was absolutely insane. And even crazier, they were shared on social media something like 6 million times. And crazier than that was that when you looked at our site stats, the majority of visitors to our website, even with all this media, came as a link from someone's personal Facebook page. And so that meant that people were really sharing this story. And the feedback that we were getting from people in the form of thousands of emails and social media comments and tweets was half and half. 50% from people who were sick or had been sick saying, thank you for making this. Thank you for making something that makes me feel seen and heard and understood. Thank you for creating this thing. And the other half being from friends and family saying, oh, thank you for making a thing that I feel good about giving, that I feel happy to give, that I don't just stand there in front of the card aisle and think, like, what do I hate the least? And of all of these comments, 99.9% of them were positive. And we all know how rare that is. And I was just so struck by how huge of a pervasive problem this was. I just had no idea that it was global. Because 16 years ago, I thought it was just me. So, after this all happened, a few publishers reached out and asked, would you want to do a book? And I said, yes, I would love to do a book. I think that it's clear that there's a really big problem here that can't be solved with a greeting card, and that is really a guide that helps people know what to say and what to do and how to be. And not just with cancer, but with anything, with all of these situations, because it's all kind of the same. People get afraid and turn away because they get afraid of discomfort, saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing. And I wanted it to be down to earth and not based in religion and not compassion science, and I didn't want it to have a rainbow on the cover or clouds or any other weird elements that would turn off a lot of the people who could actually want it and use it. And I really wanted it to be illustrated and like kind of funny. And I was like, that's kind of a lot. And I also wasn't qualified to write that book because I'm not an empathy expert, or I wasn't. And I wanted it to be research-based, like not a BuzzFeed top 10 list. And I was introduced to a friend of a friend, a woman named Dr. Kelsey Crow, who runs an amazing organization in San Francisco called Help Each Other Out. And they do these 2-hour empathy boot camps, where that's what they do, is they teach people how to show up when all you want to do is just run away and hide. And she is an empathy expert, and we got together, and she and I had the exact same vision for this weird book that we wanted to make. And so we wrote a proposal, and we took it to publishers. And some of the publishers were like, great, cool. And some of them were like, cool, except our sales team doesn't know where it's going to go in Barnes & Noble. So no. We don't know how to sell that book. So have you thought about doing a gift book of your cards? No, that's not a book. So it was a little bit of a weird journey there, but the good news is that it all worked out. In our book, There is no good card for this, What to Say and Do When Life is Scary, Awful, and Unfair to People You Love, is coming in January from Harper One. Thank you. It's 250 pages, 4-color, tons of information. Have no idea where it's going to go in Barnes & Noble, so maybe get it on Amazon. So there are a couple things that I want you to really think about when you think about all the stuff that I shared today. And number one is that innovation does not require fancy technology, venture funding, or an MBA. What it requires is a solution to a problem. And I think that a lot of us have a mistaken belief that all of the easy problems have been solved already, and that is absolutely not true. A card is a piece of paper folded in half, and that is technology that's been around since approximately 100 BC, and it costs very little to make. And empathy is just kindness. That's all it is. I didn't need to pitch it to a VC firm or invent it. And the other thing that I'd like you guys to think about is do not let not knowing how to do something stand in the way of you doing it. Innovation is learning while doing. And you can take it from me, my entire business strategy so far has been about making it up as I go, which, if you are a smart person and you're willing to put in hard work, which I know that given that you're in this room, that all of you are, it is a totally viable business strategy. Another thing I'm going to assume, since you're sitting in this room, is that all of you are innovators and problem solvers. And another assumption I'm going to make, because you're all also adult humans, is that you have had your share of crappy experiences that you have maybe taken and stored up in a little box inside your brain in order to not think about them. So my challenge that I will leave you with is opening up that box, dusting it off, seeing what's in there, and seeing if you can look at it from a different perspective and maybe use it to solve a problem. Thank you so much for having me.